And we are off. So welcome everybody on the line and those listening to the recording at a later point in time. This is the ASQ Innovation Division bringing you our wonderful Innovation Division chair tonight, Miss Rebecca Mott. And boy, are you in for a treat. She is talking about revolutionizing your team's creativity and discovering your group genius, and how you can harness this genius across your organization, not only from an innovation standpoint, but from a cultural and a performance optimization standpoint. So Miss Rebecca Mott is phenomenal. Not only does she have a pedigree from a quality perspective that's lean, that's operational excellence, that's change management, etc., but she really grounds her work in her Lean Six Sigma black belt, and again, through her focused effort in supporting not only the nonprofit world, but her government world and the ecosystems around the globe. She is phenomenal with bringing together stakeholders and partners and people across multiple communities and really helping them drive innovation forward. She has over 30 years of professional experience, quite a bit with regard to quality management, product management, Lean Six Sigma innovation. She's led several trailblazing initiatives. She has launched an innovation center, and she is facilitating many enterprise level continuous improvement initiatives, and recently founded Rethought LLC, which provides consulting, coaching, and training support for small and medium-sized businesses. So without further ado, let's raise our hands and celebrate our ASQ Innovation Division Chair, Ms. Rebecca Mott. Again, revolutionizing your team's creativity to discover your group genius.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farrell, for that generous introduction. And I am going to share my screen here and start my end of this presentation. Can you see my screen clearly?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I am going to, for the moment, leave my camera off due to some bandwidth issues. I definitely don't want to freeze or get kicked off the network during this presentation. And I just want you to know that I am here to answer your questions. So as Dr. Farrell said, if you have questions, drop them into the chat. I have experience facilitating cross-functional teams to do problem solving. So coming up with solutions to enterprise level challenges. I have, as she mentioned, experience launching an innovation center, which included onboarding some new and emerging technologies to to my company. And early in my career, I had total quality management experience, some auditing experience. So I am here to help you discover group genius. And I'm pulling from all of that experience that I've had over the years and the challenges even that I've faced in igniting innovation with teams. I will say this is not easy work. If you've ever worked with cross-functional teams, if you've ever worked with teams that have members from various disciplines and you're getting them in a room and you're trying to solve a problem, it is hard. But I hope the information I share tonight will smooth the pathway for you and make it a little easier by giving you some tips and things to think about in terms of your strategy and approach. So the agenda here is to talk about collaboration, because that is really at the core. When we talk about group genius, that's really at the core of it. And in order to understand that, we have to understand the myths and concepts that we've bought into in over the years. Just if you are in any field and the topic of innovation comes up, it immediately evokes some myths in our mind, and we have to break those myths down to really understand how group creativity works in the real world and what kinds of tools and techniques we can use to foster innovation in your team, and how you can personally practice some things to help your team in your workplace, things that you can promote with your teams if you're a leader, and overcoming those barriers to effective collaboration. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. But I always like to leave people with resources. So take a screenshot of this. Resources for you. These are resources that I have used on my own journey and pulled from when you talk about creativity and managing team dynamics and facilitation. All of these books are really good and have some good resources in them that can help you again on this journey of discovering and unleashing the power of group genius. So I hope you can take a screenshot of that, and we'll move to the next slide because I have a question for you. When you think about group genius, how would you define group genius? When you go ahead and drop that in the chat, how would you define the term group genius? And I don't know if we have anything in the chat. I can't see the chat, Dr. Rhonda. So if we have anything, you can assist me.
Yeah, so I think group genius is harnessing the power of the team to arrive at exponential outcomes that one single person on their own could not have either ideated on or achieved.
Absolutely. That is a fantastic definition. Any others? I think that one summed it up. It sounds like we have an expert in the room. So, group genius really is about that collective genius, right? It's not one single person, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But when we talk about group genius, it's how we bring a group of people together, and we'll touch on diversity. And when we say diversity, we mean people coming from different disciplines, different experience levels, different industries, collaborating together and using that diversity to leverage the intellectual capital to create some breakthrough outcomes, right? And not just normal continuous improvement. So since I have some Lean Six Sigma in my background and continuous improvement in my background, when we talk about continuous improvement, that's more of that incremental improvement where we're making small changes to processes, taking small steps forward. But when we think about unleashing group genius, we are really talking about how we set up a context to unleash these breakthrough improvements. And so let's talk about the myth of the lone genius. And this ominous picture I have on the slide of Mr. Steve Jobs. But when we talk about the lone genius, there is this myth out there. And if I were to ask you to name some innovators, you would start off with naming individuals. But what we don't understand is that while those individuals may be the face of the innovation, they are not the lone genius. So myth number one is that innovations are a result of lone creatives. So we imagine Steve Jobs in his room, maybe sitting cross-legged on a pillow on the floor, and with this pensive stance he has right here in this picture, and coming up with a deep thought that emerges as a breakthrough. And that is not at all how it works in the real world. Innovations are not a result of lone creatives. Steve Jobs had a team of folks that he engaged with and interacted with to come up with the innovations that defined Apple. Myth number two is that there are these eureka moments that happen. Now, while eureka moments are a real thing where you have that sudden spark, that sudden thought, and that does happen within the individual. But when we talk about breakthrough innovations, they are typically not the result of a lone creative in a sudden solitary moment of inspiration coming up with the next big thing. They are typically done within groups of people who connect and bounce ideas around. And in that context, the breakthrough improvement emerges. So it's not that single moment of inspiration. There's also a myth that lone geniuses create original thoughts out of thin air. Again, going back to that example that I used of Steve Jobs sitting alone, cross-legged on the floor and coming up with this sudden original thought. Now, while that does happen with individuals, when we talk about breakthrough technology innovations and breakthrough innovations in various fields, what the research shows us is that original thoughts are collective thoughts, and they don't happen out of thin air. They typically build on data, research, and information that is shared across groups. Another myth that we have is that only certain types of people are capable of creativity, and that is dead wrong. And you can find all kinds of experts out there on creativity. I'm not an expert on creativity, but what these experts say are that everyone has the capability and the capacity to be creative. And a lot of times we have experiences that may cause us to move away from those creative endeavors, but everyone has the capacity to be creative. So there's no such thing as a super creative person. We are all have the potential to be super creative. And then the last myth I want to cover is that myth of the heroic innovator being the sole driver of the innovation. Again, the face of the innovation. So if I were to say, list the name of innovators, these would be the people that you would talk about. But they are not innovating in a bubble. They are not the only leaders involved in the innovation. So Steve Wozniak, of course, was pivotal and crucial to the developments at Apple, right? He wasn't the face, but he was deeply involved in how those innovations emerged. So when we think about these 5 myths, we have to start with breaking these myths down and accepting the fact that if we're going to innovate and create breakthrough innovations, we must give up this concept of the lone genius because collaboration is the key. Collaboration is essential in today's complex and interconnected world. We have complex problems to solve today. When you talk about some of the challenges that we face, like global climate change, for example, it you're talking about multiple ecosystems across the globe being impacted with if we were to do as quality professionals a root cause analysis on that, it would be massive. And so these complex problems require us to collaborate across our imagined silos that we tend to stay within. And innovation is an imperative in today's industries. Technology adoption and adaptation is crucial for survival. We have seen over the last 15 years companies that have been around for 50, 75, 100 years close their doors. Why? Because they were unable to innovate, which leads me into competition. So, how do we spur innovation and continuous learning to build stronger teams in our companies, in our organizations, in our departments and business units? How do we help people adapt to this fast pace of change? How do we help them with that skill? And that is not within the scope of this presentation, but it is absolutely an imperative. And I am a ProSci certified change management professional, and I believe in interweaving change into anything that you're doing, whether it's continuous improvement or innovation. We also have to think about the fact that we are living in a connected world. We're more connected in 2024 than we were in 2014, than we were in 2004. And I have been around long enough to remember when we didn't have cell phones and only had what we call landlines. So all of that has uh, disappeared in terms of moving into global connectivity, which creates some challenges and hurdles, but we've got to be aware of those. And then looking at how we spur engagement and increase productivity within our teams by moving more to a shared ownership model where we're looking at how teams can own the innovation. And it's not, again, this concept of the leader, follow the leader, but the innovations emerge from and within the groups and help us achieve those quality outcomes. When you think about all of these things, you can drop in the chat. I'd be curious to know which one of these you think is the most important. If you were to put a pin in one of these as the challenge that is the hardest to overcome, which one of these is the one that you would tag as kind of the top challenge when you're looking at collaboration? All right, we'll move on to talking about how we combine competition and collaboration. So here are two different concepts that we have here. Competition, meaning that we are creating a context where people are working almost against each other in a certain sense, right? May not be, they're not concerned with what the other team is doing or what the other person is doing, but they're more focused on that individual contribution. And then we're looking at collaboration, which is all about working together to achieve a common goal. So now we bring in this concept of teamwork. And there's here's a play on words for you, co-opetition. You may come up with another way to say that. But what we're getting at here is how do we bring both aspects together? We still want to be competitive. We still want to strive to achieve the goals, but then how can we integrate collaboration into the equation so that we can address all of those challenges that we walked through on the previous slide? Because we're going back to this breaking down of the myths that there's this lone genius that comes up with this fantastic idea, and that is what, the breakthrough innovation comes from that one person, moving towards this model of let's put people together, let's connect people, and let's connect groups, let's connect teams. And how do we set up the systems, the processes, the communication pathways to move more to this co-opetition model? And this is where we start getting into the science of group creativity. What are the structural underpinnings of creative work by groups? And so when I when I look at some of those resources that I flashed on the screen earlier in the presentation, and in particular focus on Keith Sawyer's work, Group Genius, The Creative Power of Collaboration, there are three key concepts that I want us to look at that really are the underpinnings of creative work by group. And the three are improv, flow, and connection. So if we want to boil this down to what are the simplest forms of things we can focus on, improvisation, flow, and connection. First, we when we think about how teams come up with creative solutions, we can go into the arts world and look at how jazz bands perform and how improvisation theater is done. If you've ever seen an improv skit, this is a skit that is not pre-written, but we put actors, actresses on a stage and thespians on a stage, and they just make it up as they go along is what is happening, right? Jazz bands that don't have sheet music in front of them, but they're listening to what others are playing and playing off of what others are playing. So this concept of having spontaneous, unscripted interactions. Now, we are not throwing structure out the door, so I'll talk about that a little later, but we have to set up a context where these spontaneous and unscripted interactions can emerge. So as we go through the couple of case studies that I have. I want you to think about how improvisation may be playing into how these different innovations, breakthrough innovations were developed. The second concept is this concept of flow, which is putting a team in a fully immersed and engaged state. So when I think about this out of my own experience, I think about rapid improvement events, is what we would call them, or Kaizen events. So these are events where we take a team, we clear their calendars for 3 days, and we put them in a room to solve a problem. And in that, they are fully immersed in the creative work and 100% engaged. And that allows that focus that teams can get when they are put in that fully immersed and engaged environment to emerge. And then the last piece is not only having groups fully immersed and engaged, giving the space to be spontaneous and unscripted, have unscripted interactions, but also connecting. And a lot of times through play. And when I say play, we have our set work that if you have a particular role in an organization, you have duties, you have responsibilities, you have things that are assigned to you as your duties, your responsibilities. What we're talking about here is creating a context where there are no roles, there are no titles. It's just the individuals coming together collectively as a group, and the focus is completely on being fully immersed and engaged in the creative work that they're doing. So, again, this concept, if you can get in your mind, of a jazz band or of thespians on a stage that are doing an improv skit, how that plays into these three concepts. But one of the things that often comes up when you start talking about group genius is brainstorming. People will say, we need to get this team in a room, and the first thing we're going to do is bring them together and have them brainstorm some ideas. Sounds really good. Hard to do, especially if you're focused on developing those breakthrough innovation, because there are some common challenges that we run into when we start talking about brainstorming. And we need to go beyond what the normal mode of brainstorming is, and we need to consider common failure modes of brainstorming. So when you look at what people traditionally see as brainstorming, we have to break that down and understand that it has to contain certain elements to avoid these failure modes. First, you always have to be aware of groupthink, and that is where we set up a context where it's follow the leader. And it's usually a dominant opinion or a prevailing opinion, a prevailing thought that is leading it, and someone champions that prevailing thought, usually a dominant person or a leader in the room, and everyone just follows suit. And if you've ever heard of the story about the trip to Abilene, you know what I'm talking about, right? Let's go. And okay, let's go. And we get in the car, and halfway there, somebody says, why are we going to Abilene? I don't know. Shirley said we were going to Abilene, so I got in the car, right? That is a picture of group think. And then we also have to be aware of what I call evaluation anxiety. And I saw this in the Kaizen, the rapid improvement events that I facilitated, where there sometimes is a fear of judgment that keeps people from sharing bold or unconventional ideas. And through that, you limit the creativity. So my thing is I learned from Sam Kainer and company, the facilitators, the facilitator's guide to participatory decision making. We have to suspend judgment. And I actually trained at his facility out in San Francisco and have a proud pair of suspenders to remind me. Suspend judgment. And this is crucial though. This is really crucial if we want to get through those breakthrough innovations. And I talked a little bit about the improv, and I mentioned that we were going to tie that to structure. And here it is. Although we want people to be open to express those unconventional, bold ideas, we don't want to do the group thing. We also have to give some structure to it. And that, when I think about my experience with rapid improvement events as a facilitator, that was what I did. Provided that structure to allow the group to do their best thinking. And then an overemphasis on quantity can get us too. If you've ever been put in a brainstorming session and they say, come up with as many ideas as you can, and we're going to start the timer now. Now, there's a time and a place for that kind of brainstorming, but when you talk about these breakthrough innovations, one of the things that is shown throughout the research is that people need time to, I call it percolate. So percolate, which comes from, you percolate your coffee, right? Which is we got to give it some time, got to give some time to brew, to percolate. Uh, I saw this in real time in the rapid improvement events that I facilitated, where we put these teams in a room and we're looking at how do we uh, get the best ideas, right? We want quality, not quantity. Uh, we do want to put some time pressure on them, but I would see they would brainstorm one day and they would come back the next day. I would have them go back, review some of the things they did before, but even before we could get started, a lot of times people have gone and they've walked away from it, percolated, and they come back the next day with a fresh set of ideas. It's amazing. And then the last thing I want to cover here is domination by strong personalities. And this is one that in my work has come up over and over again. And again, when we talk about how we set up the context for this with our teams, we got to have that structure that keeps our groups out of the ditch of groupthink, valuation anxiety, and the being subject to these strong personalities or having one person dominate the conversation or even a group of people within the larger group dominate the conversation, preventing those quieter members from contributing the valuable insights. And one of the go-to methods that I use, you see uh, in this picture, which is silent brainstorming, where we're going to brainstorm on some sticky notes. Nobody's talking to each other. And then at the end of that process, we're going to put the sticky notes up and we're going to talk through these sticky notes together so that allows the conversation to, get jump started. So let's look at a couple of case studies as I finish the last half of this presentation. Let's fly back in time to Wilbur and Orville Wright and how this played out with these brothers who were leading innovators. They weren't the only ones that were experimenting with flight, uh, but they were the ones that figured it out first. So the thing about Orville and Wilbur were that they were two very different kinds of people. Wilbur was an analytical thinker, while Orville enjoyed that experimentation and hands-on work. But they brought those unique strengths together and each one was working to their strengths, but they were also sharing with each other. So some of that shared ownership. They also worked through an iterative process of testing, learning, and refining their designs. So they would test solutions, and it was a dynamic collaboration that went back and forth. It wasn't them, each one of them in their separate rooms, again, with this myth of the lone genius, coming up with separate individual ideas, but they were out there together, working together to iterate, test, learn, refine their designs, going back and forth. And then lastly, they collaborated with others. So when we think about how we structure collaboration in our companies, in our departments, in our organizations, we have to also look at how people collaborate with others. Uh, they weren't collaborating in a bubble. They talked to other aviation pioneers. They went and found some data from the Smithsonian that they uncovered and used in their experimentation. And they collaborated with other uh, leading engineers at the time. So this wasn't them in in a facility locked down to the outside world and innovating alone, but they were collaborating all of the time between themselves and with other people to come up with the first invention that worked for flight. Case study number 2 I want to speak to is Google's 20% time initiative that they rolled out some years ago. And that 20% time policy was allowing employees to have one day each week where they worked on a passion project or an idea that fell outside their regular job responsibilities. And out of that initiative came came 3 major ideas that eventually catapulted Google into the company it is today. The first being Gmail. How many of us use Gmail? I know I do. Google News. So if you have Google as your initial search engine, of course, the news is one of the options you can choose to pull your news for the day, and they're using the analytics to help surface what you might want to see. And then if you are involved in advertising, right? Google has AdSense, which they use to monetize uh, their advertisements that they send, that they present to you when you do a Google search. And so these 3 innovations came out of this 20% time policy, where they were allowing people to take that passion project and work on it. What they found when they looked at how these innovations emerged was, again, dispelling that myth of the lone genius, that informal groups of folks were forming around these passion projects, around these ideas, and sharing and collaborating with each other across departments, across teams. I might be on one team, but because somebody else on in a different department on a different team has the same idea or passion project, and we collaborate to move it forward. And so when they went back and looked at how these collaborations emerged, they emerged just like that, very inorganically and uh, collaboratively across the network of employees. And the last case study I want to take a look at is Netflix. So if you have Netflix, you know that it surfaces content recommendations based on things that you've already watched, things that you've clicked on, and it considers all of these. It has predictive analytics that considers all of this and delivers up personalized content for you. And the way that the whole way that Netflix has arranged this recommendation engine emerged was by groups of internal teams and external teams working collaboratively to create this breakthrough innovation. So they had engineers, data scientists, and product teams within the company that were collaborating across department lines, outside of their normal teams, sharing information with one another. And then they actually took what the internal teams built and ideated and pulled in some external expertise to contribute to this. And this is what I call, well, what Sam Kainer, when you talk about participatory decision making, he calls it the both and, right? It's not but, we're kicking the buts out, and we're doing both and. And this is something that you see when you start putting teams together, they start doing both and, not competing unless you've set up a context for competition, but they naturally gravitate towards combining ideas, combining thoughts, combining creations to create something new. And that's what we saw here at Netflix with their content recommendation engine. So let's talk about how we build a creative culture and what you can do, whether you are on a team or leading a team. What are some of the things that you can do to help build that creative culture? So I want to focus on personal actions you can take from an innovation and process improvement perspective, and then the team collaboration and creativity perspective that you can take on how you can cultivate this creative culture. The first thing is leading by example. And when we talk about leading by example, uh, what we're really saying is if you want an innovative, creative culture, you have to start with the individuals. And how can we create, train, our people on basic creative uh, ways that they can embrace the creative process, giving them tools and techniques so that they can start integrating those into their daily work. A very simple thing that I teach everyone who joins my team is whenever we are discussing an idea, we always keep asking the question, does anyone have anything else? Does anyone else have any concerns, challenges, ideas, other ideas? Just asking that question opens the door for people to begin speaking more, talking more about their own thoughts and ideas, and that gets the flywheel going. Also, creating a continuous learning culture. So, leaning in and again, training our people on the skills that they need to be creative. Things like adopting a growth mindset. What is a growth mindset? And how can I be more open in my thinking and embrace learning new things, learning new skills, and promoting that culture of continuous learning? You also want to look at how you can innovate in everyday tasks. So while breakthrough innovations can come by cross-functional teams looking at a challenge and solving it, there are times when the breakthrough innovation is just focused on how we can do an everyday task better. So the famous example that I like to use is the sticky note. And the story goes the 3M engineer was in church and he was trying to figure out a way to mark his Bible and he was having a hard time with it. And so he created this idea of a sticky note that I could stick a piece of paper in my Bible that would mark a page, but then I could also remove that that marker when I need to. And then I could also write on the sticky note. So this whole idea emerged just an everyday challenge that we were struggling with. We came up with this innovation. What made it breakthrough was where we're able to take that idea of a sticky note and apply it in other ways, use it in other ways besides just uh, going to church and marking our Bibles, right? And so focusing on what are those everyday tasks in our organization, on our teams that we can look at and start thinking about how we can create solutions to solve everyday uh, frustrations. And this, in my continuous improvement work, one of the questions I would ask teams when we were brainstorming around a process is, what frustrates you about this process? Nobody comes to work to be frustrated. So usually frustrations would surface, and that would get the conversation going about challenges with the process. You want to advocate for tools and techniques. So I've referenced some as I've talked through this presentation. What kinds of tools and techniques can we use to empower individuals and teams to be more creative? Sharing creative wins is one of the undervalued items on this list, I think. If you were looking at this list, you would think, oh yes, you just share the wins out. Okay. But what ends up happening when we get people who are sharing the innovations, it sparks other ideas in teams. So setting up a context. So at my company, one of the things we've done in our digital transformation strategy, we have digital centers of excellence, and each month they showcase a creative solution that someone has come up with using some of our digital tools. And that sparks other people to think about, oh, I might have a similar challenge. I can use that. Or, oh, I see this solution and I have a different problem. And if I modify what you did, I could come up with a solution for my challenge. So it sparks that idea. So I can't say enough about that. And then the last three are around creating a safe space. So creating that psychological safety that builds trust amongst the team, the group, so that people do feel safe to speak about those bold ideas. We want to build in resilience because if you are innovating and creating, failure will happen. And how do we teach people how to be resilient? How do we teach our teams how to be resilient? How do we set up a context for our teams so that failure is reinterpreted as learning? We didn't fail, we learned something. Let's take what we learned and move forward. And then again, encouraging that collaboration and using collaboration as a lead or co-opetition, if you will, to spur that innovation with your teams. And this is the last slide I'll cover, which is more about overcoming those challenges to collaboration. At the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that collaboration is hard work. We because we have to set up a context for it. We got to provide some support to people. We got to teach them some things. We have to uh, give them some tools, teach them some techniques. So all these things come into play. And when we look at some of the main challenges, I want to leave you with some thoughts on how you might overcome some of them. So we talked about groupthink earlier and encouraging diverse opinions and again asking for input from those quieter team members, just being aware and intentionally aware when you're in a room with your team, who's talking, but more importantly, who's not talking, and how we can use different techniques to get our quieter team members to talk, to contribute, to bring forth their ideas. One of the ideas is assigning a devil's advocate. And that means someone who intentionally takes a challenging position and using that to spur the conversation. And so you may have heard people say this term, I am going to play devil's advocate. And so here it is. What about? And using that to challenge the group's thinking, to express an unpopular opinion without coming across as someone who is being combative or is trying to introduce conflict into the group. But I can talk all day about what Sam Kainer calls the groan zone. Um, Lots of things you can do. Managing dominant personality. Again, this comes up over and over and over again when you talk about uh, blocks to collaboration and being able to, in meetings, set ground rules using structured turn taking and making sure, again, that we're giving people the tools to understand how to allow everyone a fair opportunity to bring forth their idea, to express their perspective or their opinion. You want to improve communications. So, any training that you can do around team engagement, how you can promote collaboration in teams, how you can promote participatory decision making, teaching your leaders how to think differently, how to lead differently so that these teams are not subject to the dominant personality creating a context for groupthink. So clarifying expectations and using different collaboration tools. If we were in a physical office, those sticky notes, flip charts work really well. If we're in a virtual environment, we have all kinds of methods we can use. The chat, we have electronic whiteboards we can use uh, to promote that collaboration. uh, Slack, having those informal teams that are connecting with one another in real time. You also have to overcome trust issues. So, promoting transparency and helping the team to foster informal relationships and 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 setting the context for people to build those relationships organically. One of the things that I've done for my team uh, is we do open office hour where I have open office hour. I work virtually. I work a remote work from home situation. So I have an open office hour where people can drop in. And then at the end of the week, we have what we call Finish Fridays, where we get the team together and we talk about wins for the week, plans, priorities for next week, and plans for the weekend. And the plans for the weekend is voluntary. You don't have to share, but I found that they do share. My team does share, and they learn so much about each other, and it helps just to strengthen those relationships. And then addressing a lack of engagement. So, focusing on how you build structures and systems and processes that involve people in decision making, transferring that sense of ownership to teams rather than having the leader be the only responsible and accountable. How might we transfer some of that ownership uh, to teams? So the concept of self-directed teams or self-led teams, and how do we promote that? And then again, celebrating small wins to help energize people. One of the things that happens when you are innovating and creating, and I mentioned it before, is failure is involved. And so we sometimes need to celebrate those small wins, small steps forward to keep people going, to encourage them to keep going, but also sharing any wins that we have broad and wide to ignite excitement and engagement. And with that, I want to thank you for your time and attention today. I am available to speak at your division or section meeting uh, virtually. Uh, and if you're having a meeting, a section meeting, or whatnot, if it's within driving distance, I'm willing to do that. Also, here are some of the other presentations that I've done before, talking about uh, the symphony of emerging technologies, digital transformation, talking about the groupthink effect, and also group facilitation, getting to the decision point. What is the structured process you can use to do that with your teams? I'd like to thank Dr. Farrell as our generous host for this event, and I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Farrell.
Thank you, Rebecca Mott. And I think you have big kudos. Ricky from Surrey, British Columbia says it's been a great session. Thank you for pushing creativity to a higher level. We don't have questions, but I'll ask one, Rebecca, because you just gave us so much gold and so much value and so many things that we can now take on and apply in different realms of our organizations, our communities, and even our family. And so my question would be, if they've not been here before, where they're trying some of these seminal activities or behavioral changes or tools, can you recommend one thing that's going to help them start strong, that may help them reap the greatest benefit from taking that first step, Rebecca?
That is a fantastic question. And it depends on your role in the organization. So I think if you are what we call an individual contributor on a team, one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to take a bold step forward in engaging with your leader to talk about this concept of creativity, innovation, collaboration, and how we might help our team to become more creative, innovative, collaborative. If you are a leader and you are leading a team in any way, there are so many tools and resources out there, but I think the first step is for you to recognize the power that you have as a leader and saying, what can I do in my team engagements, in my daily team interactions to create a safe space for people to begin to share more and talk more about their ideas. And these are simple things that you can do, which is I talked about kicking the butts out. So paying attention to how many times people are saying but, encouraging people to say and, and I would like to add, and I would like to add. Again, asking people when you're leading meetings, what are your thoughts? Don't just present a thought, but turn to your neighbor and say, what are you thinking? Turn to your team and say, what are your thoughts? What are your ideas? What can you bring to the table? And the big step forward there, Dr. Rhonda, is making sure you capture that
Mhm,
and share it back out with the team and follow up in a discussion.
mhm.
Here's where that structure and discipline comes in. And doing that repeatedly over and over again then builds that capacity within the team to really begin to think bigger and be more creative because you've created both the space and the by asking for the feedback, asking for more, and you have celebrated by sharing and getting them engaged with taking it through that iterative process to build
Mhm.
upon what you are learning.
Thank you, Miss Rebecca Mott, because for those on the line listening tonight and on our recording later, just laid down the magic for lessening resistance, creating momentum, creating pretty much instantaneous buy-in, and harnessing aspects to move culture forward in the way that's going to be most exponentially powerful for the leader, the team, and the group overall. So Rebecca Mott, you are an absolute master at sharing this information. We are so grateful for your ideas. You're challenging us forward in these areas. I love your holistic approach with regard to the different tools and the toolkits, and really how you brought everything home through the use of different case studies. So no matter which discipline we're in within the organization, you had a story that resonated with us, where we could see ourselves really helping our teams move this concept forward. So thank you for a masterful presentation and all the phenomenal takeaways. And last but not least, the challenge you gave to us to take this information and apply it like tonight. So thank you so much, Rebecca. And for those on the line, we are going to share one last bit, because this is not the last bit of Miss Rebecca Mott that you're going to see, because we're recognizing her as our chair. We're recognizing our team with regard to Miss Jackie Jolly, our secretary, and our immediate past chair and treasurer, Mr. Larry Miller. Miss Rebecca Mott invites you to join our team for 2024 and 2025 and beyond. Please fill out your leadership pipeline, and there's a nomination survey that we'll send out in just a little bit later tonight in this deck. And then if you want to be a volunteer, we also have a volunteer survey that you can share with us what you're passionate about in this innovation space. If you're not a member of ASQ, we welcome you to join ASQ or ASQE, depending on whether you want an individual membership or an organizational membership. If you are a member of ASQ, we invite you to visit our site at My ASQ Innovation TC and to review the ASQE Insights on Excellence. There is a plethora of wealth around innovation and technology and many other topics where you can take and harness the concept that Rebecca shared with you tonight and apply them to resiliency, can apply them to adoption and use of technologies, business process improvement, Kaizen events, etc. So we welcome you to read that phenomenal body of knowledge. And then again, our lineup from September to early next year. If you would like to attend our Innovate for Excellence Summit, our Mr. Peter Merrill, one of our founding fathers of the Innovation TC, on the 24th, Mr. Zubair Anwar, another founding father of innovation across ASQ and the globe. And then again, rounding out our lineup will be Miss Kim Farrington, talking about multi-generational workforce and the impetus and impacts and value that can bring to innovation. So without further ado, we thank you so much for joining us. We welcome you back here on our Zoom link on the 24th of October. And again, great thanks to our Innovation TC Chair, Ms. Rebecca Mott, for an outstanding presentation with lots of gold nuggets for us to use and implement. So again, good night, everybody. This is ASQ Innovation TC out. And again, thank you to our phenomenal speaker and all of you as our attendees. Good night.